I wonder who is your favourite character in the Bible? And well, since you asked, let me tell you about mine. He comes up every year at the feast of the presentation of Christ in the temple from Luke chapter 2. He is Simeon. Simeon is like one of those gorgeous old folks who is always there for you. Perhaps like an honorary grandparent. I was lucky enough to grow up with several of them in my wider family and in the neighbourhood along the road. Simeon's a kindly figure who is wise and prayerful, eyes glistening with hopefulness, and who is utterly accepting and safe. I wonder if you know anyone like that. I hope so. Our church communities are functioning at their very, very best when a young couple who enter green and with a new baby, nervous, are received and befriended and grounded and supported by people such as Simeon and Anna. They may arrive as strangers, but they find themselves joining a story, discovering a new horizon, and inheriting a family that they never leave. Forgive me for a rather overextended imagination about this wonderful old man, Simeon. He is my role model for growing old. Here he is, in a very favourite painting about him. It hangs in a side chapel of Norwich Cathedral. It's by John Opie, dated 1791. Perhaps he's imitating Rembrandt's portrayal with the prophet Anna here, just behind him in the shadows. Simeon captivates me with his sense of honour, the sheer awe and wonder that he gets to hold this marvel of a child, that he gets to see salvation. It's like you catch his surprise, you share his discovery, you see it in his fingertips stretched out and tingling. In appearance, he's some kind of cross between, shall we say, Santa Claus and Rowan Williams, overflowing with loving attention, with depth and wisdom, and with gratitude, and fully present to this moment, a moment he knew would come, yet which he'd been waiting for decades, perhaps all of his life. I don't know, but for some of you, this might be like the moment when you get to hold your first grandchild, but magnified by 1,000. Arguably, Simeon is the first Christian, the first person to bear testimony to the person of Christ, the first to declare his salvation, at least according to Luke. Yet he remains a faithful Jew. He's not baptized, so far as we know. I imagine he continues to serve as a verger in the temple, keys jangling in his pocket, welcoming visitors, clearing up after them, praying every step of the way. He's described as righteous and devout, which is to say, he's not one to rock the boat when it comes to living and upholding traditional faith. He's not a radical like John the Baptist. He'd never move a service time or change the liturgy. He's more the safe keeper of the tradition, reciting the Torah like an 8-o'clocker might recite the BCP. Certainly, he knew the scriptures, the Hebrew scriptures, what we'd now call the Old Testament, because it's from those scriptures that he speaks, that he understands what God had promised, the consolation of Israel, the end of exile, the arrival of the Messiah. And he stands at the junction of time, quite literally, at the end of the Old Testament and at the beginning of the New, as BC turns to AD, as the past becomes the future. And he is the one who spots that God's biggest promises have been woven together and brought to birth in this child, Jesus. But not every Jewish person inhabited those promises and lived as expectantly as Simeon. You don't need to be you don't need to be young to be the one who lives life on the balls of your feet, ready for God to break into the routine of every day with the promises of eternity. Ready in the sense continually of being ready, set to go. Simeon's life is shaped around the conviction that God has promised to transform fate into destiny, and that he'll do it through the Messiah. And here he is. Let me just pause on the story of Simeon, and ask how you're doing in living life like him. Not only in lockdown, it takes a spiritual workout equivalent to Joe Wicks or MadFit doing their daily physical workout, so you too are poised on the balls of your feet, rehearsing the scriptures and saying your prayers so that you live life in expectation of God's actions, righting the wrongs of injustice, healing our desperate world, and bringing salvation. The trouble sometimes, when we focus on the discipline of all that, the fitness can become an end in itself, even a dirge that we inflict on others, rather than an opportunity, a window, ensuring our focus is on God and whatever God may be doing, ready, set for divine fulfillment. And when Simeon took this child in his arms, he knew his life was complete, and Israel's life was complete. He praises God and voices words that echo the prophecy of Isaiah from 500 years previously. Because some parts of Isaiah's prophecy had already come true, most people skipped over the parts that hadn't. Ignore those bits. They're crazy radical. They don't fit with the world as we know it. But for Simeon, the logic works in the opposite direction. Because some parts of Isaiah had come true, so we may trust God and expect fulfillment of what remains and is not yet fulfilled. That includes the servant songs, those remarkable sections that speak of a mystery figure, even though he suffers, one who will bring hope and healing, and not just to Israel, but far beyond. It's radical because there's a universal horizon, which is to say that Israel's Messiah will come not just for the consolation of Israel, but as a light to enlighten all people everywhere. And it's radical because here he is, right now. At this point, the faithful Israelite Simeon might not have been heard as so faithful. This declaration does not make for stability. He's not protecting Israel's past right now. Here is a dangerous radical saying things that could explode the identity of Israel and mess up its carefully re-established systems and structures. Don't ever assume that because a person is old, they are a stick in the mud. Not here. For Simeon, Tradition is the gift that shapes the new horizon. With confidence based on the promises of the past, his imagination is focused for what God might be doing in the future. That is to say, we look backwards for the purpose of being resourced in what to expect going forwards. Tradition fuels innovation. They're not opposites. Simeon may be an old man on the outside, but inside we discover his heart is young. He's on his toes, supple and ever ready, just waiting for God to act, for change to come, for the future to happen. And here it is. I wonder if you've worked out how to grow old as graciously as Simeon, and how you keep your heart supple and young and expectant for that moment of clarity when you discern that your prayers are being answered, that God is doing or saying something that really matters. I wonder, especially to those of you who think of yourself perhaps as old, if you're prepared to step out and be the crazy radical one who is unafraid of change, harnessing the riches of tradition for the sake of informing innovation, helping those younger who may be more conservative than you. And I wonder, to those of you who think of yourselves perhaps as young, if you might not draw on the wisdom and discernment of the older generation to see salvation, to discern how God is at work, and not least to ensure you never underestimate the power and insight of those who know how to wait on God and pray. Simeon stands at the junction of the Old and New Testament, not as the old guard, but as the doorkeeper to the new. Let's call him a pioneer minister who plants a fresh expression. Even in his fading robes and carpet slippers, he demonstrates it is never too late to say yes to adventure and to recognise the God of surprises, to point us to the light to the nations. What surprise do you long for? A vaccine, yes, and for the science to keep up with its variants. An honorary grandparent, perhaps, and the safe space where there is welcome and wisdom and wonder. Or above all, the sight of salvation, the concrete fulfillment of every promise of God, a new life that is tangible, that you can hold and hold out. A life that makes sense of every past life and brings hope to every new life and every fading life and every wasted life. A life that brings light to the nations, to every dark corner of our world. Thanks to Simeon, we have eyes that see and hands that hold and perhaps hearts that flex and hope that perseveres. I pray that for you as for me. All of us centred on Christ, who does not grow old, rather, who is making all things new. Yes, even today, even this year, even amidst pandemic. Hallelujah.